Good morning, my brothers and followers. I remain Edward Washroom, the tutor in Edward's Academy. This morning, I will bring to you an interesting development in macroeconometrics. I'm going to teach you how to estimate the structural VAR model and the reason behind the estimation of the structural VAR model. The structural VAR model is an improvement in the conventional VAR model that was made famous by Christopher Sim in 1982. Christopher Sim in 1982, while modeling the macroeconomic reality at the time, exposed the concept of vector autoregression model. The vector autoregression model tries to actually model the contemporaneous relationship among macroeconomic variables. The VAR model is arithmetical in nature, arithmetical in the sense that it is not based on any known economic theory. And given the limitation inherent in the VAR model, the structural VAR model becomes a very handy tool to fill the gap that is created by the VAR model. The VAR model also tries to use the orthogonal impulse response functions and the variance decomposition function to actually decompose or derive or to ascertain the contemporaneous relationship that exists among macroeconomic variables, but an attempt to describe the contemporaneousness of these key variables has not yet fruited, hence the reason behind the introduction of the structural VAR model. The structural VAR model, in trying to achieve such feat, places restrictions on the implementation of key macroeconomic policies. Basically, the structural VAR model is necessary and needed while modeling or estimating fiscal policies and monetary policies. In fiscal policies, for instance, when government anticipates or when government thinks that there is a deficiency in aggregate demand, which is as a result of the increase in unemployment or global pandemic or war, the government may actually decide to increase government expenditure on goods, government expenditure on key infrastructure. And when government increases high expenditure on infrastructure, government will increase the tax base or tax rate, also borrow money from other sources to finance high expenditure. And in cost of borrowing money and increasing tax base and tax rate, government will increase public deficit and output will continue to fall. And the basic observation or conclusion that economics can give to that relationship is that increase in government expenditure is also the cause of reduction in output. But the issue is that the key variables of interest may have altered endogenously and not because the government expenditure expands. On monetary policy stance, if government also anticipates that there is economic depression or that government actually want to reduce the level of inflation in an economy, government will also use the monetary policy instrument by actually increasing the monetary policy rate. If government increases the monetary policy rate, it will have a positive impact on interest rate, and when interest rate increase, it will reduce the volume of loanable funds as people may find it difficult to borrow money for investment. In such scenario, government will try to reduce the level of liquidity in the system. And the possible conclusion people may actually give to such scenario: when government reduces the level of liquidity, it will cause a decline in productivity. At that level, people will now conclude that increase in government attempt to reduce inflation has amounted to a decrease in output, and which is not the right conclusion. The right conclusion could also be that those parameters acted endogenously. So the issue is that government will place restrictions on key areas of interest to enable the government achieve actually what the government intends to achieve. Let me explain this concept in a different way. For instance, if the government of Nigeria decides that they actually want to pursue a particular fiscal policy measure that requires government to close down a particular road at a time due to either construction or inability of the contractor to actually implement the particular sections of the agreement. And the fact that that particular road is closed over time does not mean that government will not make use of it, or an important personality of interest will not make use of it, or that the road will not be used when there is emergency. Because of restrictions or because of government policies, those roads can also be used when they are not supposed to be used. At that level, implementing such policy has become a problem. So the essence of the structural VAR model is to actually expose to readers that when government policies, mainly fiscal and monetary policies or trade policies, are being made, there is always restrictions placed on key sections of the policies to actually allow government achieve general satisfaction in other policies. Because most government policies interwoven, the presence or implementation of a particular policy may actually have a negative impact on the implementation of other policies. At that level, government will veto key or strategic section of one policy to enable government attain equilibrium in all its objectives at a time. So in view of this development, I will proceed to my review worksheet where I look at the impact of some key macroeconomic policies on economic growth in Nigeria. So to have that estimated, I go to estimate VAR to actually identify the appropriate lag length of the study. Recall that before you do the VAR model, you should know your lag length. Estimate my model in a way that will be okay. My dependent variable is the log of GDP. I introduce the log of exchange rate because I'm using real exchange rate is a value. I introduce inflation, and I am also introducing interest rate into this equation without changing anything here. If I click OK, I will actually be exposed to an output that looks like this. I will be exposed to an output that looks like this. But this is not where we are going to. I'll go to view from this output. I'll move on to lag structure. I will come to lag length criteria. I will hit my OK button, and I will be exposed to my VAR lag order selection criteria and output. My attention should go to AIC because I am using the AIC as my information criteria from my unit 2 testing now. So I will be using lag 3 for this estimation. I'll go back to the estimate equation box. I will change the lag selection from lag 2 to lag 3 without changing any other thing. I hit OK. If you hit OK, you'll be exposed to the vector autoregression output estimated this day. Then from this result, we will now go to PROC. From PROC, we go to estimate structural factorization. We come to this restriction presets area. We have too many restriction boxes, but we are going to use recursive factorization, a unit triagonal and B unit diagonal. I hit on it without changing any other thing. Leave it at manual, and I hit OK. I will now be exposed to an output that looks like the structural VAR estimation estimated this day. The first phase of this result is my model A diagonal, triangular. The second phase of this result is my model B diagonal. So the later part of this result we have the C coefficient from C1 to C. Then we also have the A parameter coefficient. We have the A coefficient, we have the B coefficient. In my next video, I will actually teach you how to present these particular results on Microsoft Word for proper interpretation, to actually decompose or to derive the impulse response functions from this result. You go to view, you go to impulse response function, you change to multiple, leave it at multiple graph. You hit, you can decide to vary the period of focus. I'm using 5 years focused. I'll leave it at analytical asymptotic. Now click okay. I will not be exposed to response to Kolaski one-sided standard deviation of the shock of each of the variable on themselves. Recall that in this system, all the variables are endogenous in nature. Being endogenous means that the variables are all dependent variables on themselves. So given that condition, I will now proceed to actually offer interpretation to this in my next video. But if you actually want it today, you can go back, revert back to my interpretation of impulse response function in my previous Var estimation to actually derive the variance error decomposition. You go back to view, you go to variance decomposition function, you change from multiple graph to table without changing any other section of this particular variance decomposition. You hit OK, you'll be exposed to an output that looks like this. This is the variance decomposition for the period 1 to period 5. We have the shocks, the forecast error variances of each of the parameters estimated here. So if you actually want to look at the historical decomposition, you go back to view, you move on to historical decomposition. You can use combined graph now. You will now leave it at Kolaski day of adjustment. You hit the OK button, you'll be exposed to historical decomposition using Kolaski one-sided width. At this level, you can also offer meaningful interpretation to each. Pull it over, arrange them in your Microsoft Word for appropriate interpretation. If you are doing a paper on a structural VAR, recall that structural VAR tries to force itself on a theory. Structural VAR is not based on any theory like the VAR framework, but the results inherent in structural VAR can be interpreted using any economic or macroeconomic theory of your choice. So this is how to estimate structural VAR, and that is actually what we are talking about. You want to perform residual tests, you go to residual tests, you move on to normality tests. From normality test, you can leave it as square, covariance, and others. This is your VAR residual normality test. We have the joint components, we have the skewness, we have the cortices, we have the Jacobi-Beer text, we have the joint probability value. Your attention should actually go to the joint probability value. In what we have here, we have a situation that is not actually good at all, but that is not the area we're actually going to. So basically, my friends and brothers, this is how we estimate VAR and structural VAR. Thank you for staying tuned to my video. Thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for actually checking out to Edwards and Edwards Academy all the time. I assure you that in my subsequent video, I'm going to be exposing interesting development in macroeconometrics. Thank you and God bless you.